According to the computer. Okay, excellent. Just in time for kitties to make it on screen as well. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. And Gabrielle, feel free to keep admitting people as I welcome us. As everyone's getting settled, I'm Phoebe Morad. You probably know me by now. Phoebe Morad, Director of Lutherans Restoring Creation. And we're grateful to have you as part of this space. I was just sharing that I'll start us off today kind of with a little perky tour of some of our resources for Lent and devotional stuff. And then I'm really grateful to hand the heavier heart part over to Pastor Baird, who's going to lead us through some discussion and just kind of where you might need to be. I feel like there are enough of us in the room that we will have a couple small breakout sessions as well. So we will stop recording then and then come back together again. So that's the flow. If everyone's good with that, we'll be together for about an hour. With that, I'm going to just start. And as I settle us with our land acknowledgement, if you can add to the chat where you're zooming in from, if you know the original Earth Keepers on the land on which you are, please share that. If you want to share, Sharon just shared something bright that she found today. Feel free to add that in the chat too. I think we all could use some good news. So if you find something bright, make sure to add that to add to where you're coming in from today. So I will settle us with our knowledge acknowledgement. As we live, work, and worship in the land that is now called the United States, Lutherans Restoring Creation recognizes that we do so on land that was stolen from Indigenous peoples. As we are called to restore creation, we are also called to restore right relationship with one another. As we join in this holy vocation of loving our neighbor, we honor all our Indigenous siblings who have been companions of the lands, waters, and beings of Turtle Island since time immemorial. We charge our community to learn about the original and continuous stewards of the land upon which we exist. We lament legacies of violence, cultural genocide, and displacement of Indigenous communities, committing ourselves to hearing and speaking the truth of that history and its ongoing effects. May we gather faithfully in mind, body, and spirit so that we may mend what has been broken and embody Christ's gospel of abundant life. And a few things I just wanted to highlight with, again, as we're sharing some perky news and any bright spots that you're adding to the chat. I am just going to take you on a quick tour, a little bit of some things that you can find on our website that hopefully you've already used. If anybody wants to talk about as well, if you have used this or anything else, just know that, yes, we're in this call right now together. This is our time together. And for those of you listening in the future, I hope this is helpful. But also know that there are some more tactile tools that might be a little bridge for folks to be able to bring this to their congregation that might have never thought about what the connection is between Lent and caring for creation. Some very focused ideas here in the Carbon Fast calendar, which is wonderful. And you don't have to do it during Lent. If you want to pick another month, there are some great ideas. Another amazing toolkit, Creation Justice Ministries has a beautiful kit that really will take you through with liturgies. Another kind of more secular look, 100 things you can do to help the climate. I will let my colleagues, Gabrielle and Baird, speak a little bit to the No Plastics for Lent, as that program has been going on for a while. You can look in the past, but also look to the future for more information. And this is to highlight, this is from, I'll be a little biased, this is from my New England Synod. Our green team was able to put this beautiful piece together and they shared it across the Synod. Keep in mind that you really know your habitat best in your Synod. If you can pull anything together to share within your Synod, it will be incredibly beneficial. I mean, it's great to have these national, programs but really people want to hear about where they live. So if you can look through some of these materials and maybe think about what could we do in our own habitat, I hope that can offer inspiration. And a number of wonderful books are also listed here. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is I'm just going to show you where to find it. But I'm really excited that if anybody has had the opportunity to hear Barbara Rossing share a sermon, or maybe some of you have taken classes with Barbara Rossing. She is wonderful, and I'm very grateful that Barbara Rossing has offered to share a sermon for any of us that wants to hear it individually or want to share it with our congregation. I'll put this in the chat, but I'll stop sharing for now. Here we go, so I can see people's faces who I'm talking to. Hi again. The beautiful part about this is that it's right after Easter, when I think maybe some pastors are a little tired, worship teams are a little tapped. It is also beautiful that we get to kind of offer this amazing preacher. If you want a great supply preacher for the week after Easter, that might be really nice to be able to offer your church that respite, so that everybody can kind of sit back and listen. So if you register, I'll put it in the link unless it already is there. There we go. Yeah, it's a wonderful respite. And you kind of know that Reverend Dr. Barbara Rossing is going to be an incredible preacher. But if you want to know what she has to say beforehand, you register, you'll get the link a couple weeks before, so that you can listen to the sermon and maybe work in the hymns that you want, work in, what her message has to do in your context. So you'll have some time to look at that as well. Or if you just want to listen to it on Earth Day, we will have it played live on our YouTube channel on Earth Day itself as well. So any questions about that? Or thank you, Gabrielle, for putting in. I'm excited about it, and very grateful. And I realized too that we kept trying to kind of reinvent how we did a few great online worship services during COVID, which everybody loved. If you haven't ever been able to see them, they're a nice place to go, or at least have on running next to you if you need a little inspiration. But those 3 years where we were really caught off guard, it was a beautiful time to collect stories and just images and learnings from across the country. And that was a special time. And aren't we all happy that we don't have to do that ever again? So we realized also that it's time to maybe share some sermons, but you all celebrate Earth Day on the land where you are, please. So I am kind of glad that we're past that. So we're just offering the sermon. So speaking of sermons, I am going to hand the baton over to Pastor Baird. I like saying Pastor Baird now. Getting used to it. I don't know if you are, Baird, but I'm very grateful. Baird has been on our board for, it's now going into your 4th year. And I have to say, I was really honored, because Baird was one of the first people who I ever said, I'm just curious if you might want to could you maybe be on our board? I've always wanted to be on your board, or something to that effect. And I was just like, you've even heard of it? Anyways. So I've always been very grateful to work with you, Baird, but I'm especially grateful when we get to share you. So I'm glad you're here, and thank you very much for ushering through this difficult Lent.
Thanks, Phoebe. Thank you all for being here. It's good to share some time in the midst of everything that's going on. And the hope that I have for tonight is just to offer a couple thoughts for reflection, and then have some time to check in with each other. I say that, and I want to immediately caveat that with, you might not know many people on this call, and this might not be the community that you want to do your processing with. There's a lot of heaviness going on, and it can be a lot to ask to show up to a space full of people that you don't know, to really process through whatever feelings have been coming up, with the frustration, the fear, the resentment that I'm personally feeling about a lot of the situation that's out there. And if this is not the space where you want to do that, that's fine. If hopping on a call with some people that you're probably not going to bump into the grocery store with and getting a process in that space is good for you, perfect. Let it out. But I want to just acknowledge that as we're dealing with some heavy topics and a heavy moment in history, that you're not required to do anything in this space. Whatever is going to be a good use of your time is, I trust you to be the one to discern that. I have been reflecting lately about how grateful I am that Lent is lined up right after presidential inaugurations. That just happens to be the way that calendars work out and the way that we've structured our pattern of civic life. Because this Lent has felt to me particularly ashy, you might say. The the things that we're hearing every day from Washington, the disregard for creation, the Supreme Court decisions about what the EPA can do to regulate sewage in the water. Like every day, there's something that's upsetting and absurd about our current moment. Um, the public backlash against science as a way of understanding and moving through the world as a important tool for us to be able to take care of our neighbors the way that Jesus has called us to. For me, this Lent has felt particularly heavy, and the fragility of the world that God has created, the preciousness of it, and our responsibility to care for it has felt very present to me. That being said, Lent is a season to embrace fragility and a season to embrace vulnerability. It's a If you've ever had the experience of marking people's foreheads with ashes on Ash Wednesday, then you will know that there is kind of a spiritual vertigo that comes from rubbing ashes on the heads of 80-year-olds and 8-month-olds and telling both of them that one day you'll die. And that is a bit of an odd thing to be doing across the board. So if you haven't had that experience, I highly recommend it. You get really existential really fast while getting into that space, and you go home and read Ecclesiastes, and it's uh, what a ride. But what I wanted to talk about this evening is the invitation that is there in the vulnerability, in the fragility of the moment. And for us who have chosen the path of caring for creation as a part of our vocation, as a priority for the way that we structure our lives, I want to get into the kind of emotional complexity of this moment where I think a lot of us, I'll speak for myself and for people that I know, but not for everyone on this call. A lot of us have the lived experience of spending a lot of time thinking about how my actions conform or don't with my priorities, with my beliefs about how we should care for creation, whether or not I'm participating in creation well, as a good neighbor, as a good creature, and often realizing that my actions don't line up terribly well with my priorities or my desires, partially because of the system that we all live and move and operate in. And that is not something that I want to condemn people for. And it's appropriate for us to be thinking about ourselves as consumers, as participants in the economy, as citizens, as people who have power over our relationship to creation. And right now, the the weight of that feels different to me than it did even during the first Trump presidency, even the first time that he pulled out the Paris Accords and started to yell about how we're in an energy crisis in America when we've never had more energy, both available for our own use or for export, in the entire history of our country. And the frustration that I feel about kind of the absurdity of that has been heavy for me. The first Sunday of Lent this year, our reading was about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. And that's a passage that I've read hundreds of times, that I've preached on before, that I've led Bible studies about. And one thing that I was struck by this year as I was reading that these temptations come to Jesus at the end of 40 days of fasting when he's famished is the word that's used in the NRSV. I have always read that as, man, he's never been more vulnerable. He's never been more susceptible. It must be so tempting at that point. But this year, as I was reading it, a different thought occurred to me, which is that the devil has terrible timing and he might be a liar and he might be devious, but he is not smart because at the end of 40 days, I think that Jesus may have never been more confident in his ability for self control, that he's never been more comfortable with hunger, with the temptation to use his power for his own comfort than at any point in his ministry. At the end of those 40 days, Jesus knows exactly what he's made of, which is pretty stern stuff. I was starting to think that if the devil really wanted to have an in, that he should have showed up on day 4 when that hunger was new, when the discomfort was as novel as it had ever been. And Jesus didn't know if he was going to be able to make it, didn't know what it meant to be filled with the Spirit, didn't know what it meant to really walk the path that had been laid before him. And that thought has been giving me a bit of courage in this Lenten season, that the choice to engage with vulnerability, the choice to engage with our limitations, with our creatureliness, with our need, is not something that in the end leaves us feeling less powerful, is not something in the end that leads us to despair, that truly grappling with that reality, that looking it in the face, remembering, and I mean then the remembering, attaching those members to ourselves, embodying that truth that we are dust, that we are creatures of this earth, that we are fully dependent on our Creator, and that we won't be here forever. That invites us into a process that does feel scary and does involve grief and lament and fear. But if we follow the path long enough, leads us to a place of recognition and trust that goes beyond what our egos are naturally inclined to follow. I don't like being told the reality that I'm not God. I don't like being told that this is a problem that I alone can't fix. That's offensive to my ego. I was raised in America as a white dude, and I was told from the moment that I was born that I could do anything I set my mind to. And then I graduated from high school and I understood the problems of the world were just a little bit bigger than even my most earnest efforts could be. And I am thinking that during this Lent, the invitation into vulnerability, the invitation of the ashes, is to learn trust in a way that I think is more urgent now than it has been before. I think when we are getting our butts handed to us, when we're not winning the way that we had hoped to, when the tides have turned against us, at least for a season, it's never more urgent than then to come to God and ask for the lesson of trust, to ask to receive the lesson of vulnerability. And right now, Gabrielle and I are leading ELCA young adults through a series for Lent for the No Plastics for Lent series. We have asked some really talented, insightful, thoughtful young adults from around the church, folks who were cradle Lutherans, people who have come to this tradition later in life, to reflect on some of the tools that God has given us to practice that vulnerability and trust, prayer and fasting, almsgiving, acts of service, and reflect on those in terms of our relationship to creation. What changes in us when we fast, when we spend that time paying attention to what we consume and how we consume it without judgment, it's there's nothing wrong with being a creature that needs to take in energy in order to survive. That's just how we're made. But an opportunity to reflect on the fact that that means that we're vulnerable, and that that's not a flaw in the system. That's not a bug. That's a feature of what it means to be human. And I've been very encouraged by the conversations that we've gotten to have with folks who are trying as hard as they can to be who God has called them to be in this moment. And I think that what I'm seeing over and over again through that process, through talking to people about discipline, about the experience of Lent, of the ashiness of it, is that vulnerability and resilience are very closely tied together. And looking back at my confidence, my self-belief, maybe, if I'm being kind, maybe my arrogance, if I'm being honest, I used to think of my resilience and vulnerability as being opposed to one another. And I am learning that I don't get to be resilient without practicing being vulnerable. In this season, where we are faced with challenges that I don't think, if anyone here had imagined or predicted the challenges that we'd be facing in 2025, I would love to talk to you about winning lottery numbers because you seem to have some insight that I'm not having access to. But we are at a time where at least I feel my vulnerability more intensely than I ever have, where I'm feeling the limits of my power more intensely than I ever have. And I am trying to view that as an invitation into true resilience, which is ultimately true trust in God. So, what I wanted to pose to this group is the question of what God is asking of you in this season, and conversely, what you are asking of God. Right now, the paths of advocacy, the paths of adaptation and mitigation that we have structured so much of our systems for advocacy around, whether through the UN or through the federal government, trying to be able to affect change on the scales that needs to be affected. Those avenues are closed to us for the next few years, and who knows what those avenues will look like in the years that follow. And it can be tempting to immediately move to try and figure out some way to speed things along, to fix this situation before we're we're really able to. And I want to spend some time instead in the vulnerability and feeling that limitation, feeling that dependence that we have all the way through. That's my hope for this season at this call. We're not going to get, if anyone feels like they're going to be able to feel all those feelings all the way through on this call, I applaud you, but I don't think that that's probably most people here. But I want to really dive into that space of listening both to your heart, what is your heart crying out to God for? And in turn, what is God asking of you? And there's plenty of ways that we can complicate those things, and maybe you will in your breakout rooms, and that's fine. But I'm not going to complicate those things. Whatever that means to you right now, I'll invite you in your breakout rooms to introduce yourself to each other, get to know a little bit about where you're coming from. I just came from a call where the question was, if you were a weather system right now, what kind of weather system would you be? Would you be bright and sunny day? Would you be some thunderheads? What's your weather system? Maybe that can be a good chance to check in emotionally, and then get a chance to ask and listen. What's God asking of you? What are you asking of God? And in the way that God is present wherever two or three are gathered, know that God is listening there too, and probably speaking if we can be careful enough. So, with that, I'll invite us into our breakout rooms. I think Phoebe has
I
those.
did. I set them up for 3 or 4 of you each, but I know that some of you I don't see. Let me pop